A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Conserve to Preserve, organized by the Wilderness and Wildlife Protection Society and the Globe family of Royal College to raise awareness about threats to wildlife and forest conservation. In today's day and age, we see a lot of human activities that jeopardize wildlife and nature. With us today, we have a very experienced panel that has seen through the generations and has seen the damage that has been affecting the planet and wildlife.
Here with us is one of the senior leading urban planners with 25 years of experience. His special focus is on strategic urban planning and regional planning, site planning, city-level greenhouse gas auditing, and climate change adaptation. He is none other than Professor PKS Mahanama. We also have with us Professor Devaka Veerakol, a professor in zoology and environmental sciences at the University of Colombo. His main research interest has been on conservation of threatened species in Sri Lanka. He has also worked on wetland ecology and wetland management for nearly a decade. He serves as a technical advisor on fauna for the Red Listing Program of Sri Lanka from 1996 to date. Also joining us today is Mrs. Shirani Balasurya. She is currently a chartered architect and a chartered landscape architect. She is also the senior consultant to the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture degree program of the Department of Architecture in University of Moratuwa. She is also the honorary secretary of Ruk Rakaganno, which is the Tree Society of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Dinath. So as we all know, wildlife and nature play a big role in all our lives. And up to date, as a result, excessive urban development has been a major threat to our environment. So without further ado, we would like to direct our first question to Professor Veerakon. Sir, as a conservationist, what do you see as the threats towards wildlife due to urban development?
Okay, so the question you are raising is how does urbanization affect wildlife? One of the things that urbanization do is it results in loss of habitat available for wildlife. What you see here is what has happened to wetlands in the Colombo metropolitan region. Over the last 4 decades or so, we have lost really 40% of the wetlands in Colombo, and we continue to lose about 1 to 2%. Now, I'm going to show you another picture. This is actually from uh, a river basin north of Colombo. This is referred to as the Kaluoya Mudun Ala Basin. This region, if I may explain to you, this is somewhere around here is Ragama, Kadavata, Jayala, Kandana, this area. And what you see here is a series of pictures we have developed showing the vegetation index and how it has changed. Now, this is in 1975. You can see about 92% of this basin is covered with vegetation. And if you refer to here, 2016, it is down to some 20+%. So what you see here is a classic signature of urbanization. Uh, Cities begin to expand at the expense of natural environment, especially with vegetation. So when these vegetation disappears, it also results in loss of habitat to many species. And as a result, we see a lot of species disappearing. Now, when I was a child, I grew up in Belangville. We used to have jackals, we used to have a fair bit of wildlife. But today, many of those species are gone. Yet in city of Colombo, you still have globally endangered species like fishing cats, otters, etc. But one of the things that I see as a result of urbanization, available natural habitat begins to disappear, and that results in major loss of habitat. And also another feature of urbanization is we are putting up lots and lots of high-rise buildings. What you see here is a photograph of Colombo around the Parliament Lake area. And when you put up buildings like this, it leads to a lot of collision of birds, especially during migratory season when migratory birds arrive in Colombo or passes through Colombo. They're very tired, and a lot of times they can't see this kind of glass structures, so they just fly into it, result in collision and death. During migratory season, we received a lot of injured birds, specifically due to this. I think even us human beings sometimes find it difficult to negotiate glass doors, glass windows, because sometimes it's not very clear. So what we can do is we can make them more visible by putting stickers or coloring them and so on. But when urban designers don't take these things into consideration, this is another issue that we have to face with. And then another major wildlife issue that arises due to urbanization is conflict. What you see here is a purple-faced langur. This is a globally endangered monkey, but I have this monkey even in my neighborhood, in my home garden. I see them every day. But they are in conflict because what is happening is as cities grow, the parcel size of land begins to decrease. So there is less and less trees in our gardens. So they are forced to travel through our roofs, or they will come and eat on the only remaining mango. That creates a conflict. I know most people in my neighborhood sees these monkeys as a threat, as a conflicting organism, even though I find it very interesting to have a globally endangered animal in my home garden, but not many people see it in that light. Or this bird, if you travel around Colombo, you can see lots of pelicans. Now, pelicans a few years ago were globally endangered. Even today, they are near threatened. Now, if you go to Vauxhall Street, you will see this nougat tree where they breed mostly. And if you look at the people around this area, they find these birds as a menace because they defecate and they have very corrosive fecal matter and it smells a bit. But these are globally near threatened species sitting in the heart of Colombo. But there is very little tolerance towards such species because we see them as conflicting species from our day-to-day life. Then the other thing that happens with urbanization is urban expansion leads to more and more road development. If you look at this aerial photograph, you can see there's a wetland here, there's a wetland here, and there's a road going through it. And species that live in these wetlands uh, continuously move around. But when you have roads and when you have very heavy traffic, the result is this. This is a globally threatened fishing cat killed by a roadkill. So we see a lot of roadkills happening, a lot of electrocutions, a lot of unnecessary deaths to wildlife happening again because we do not take into account that these animals move around a bit, and the way we develop, we fragment their habitats and they are forced to move over roads. And or sometimes if you take monkeys, they will try to use electrical wires, and in the process they will get electrocuted or hit by vehicles and so on. And then this is another issue that we face. With urbanization comes the issue of solid waste disposal. And unplanned solid waste disposal lead to overproduction of large number of pest species like crows or pigeons and so on, which can become a problem in an urban setting. And at the same time, we do a lot of feeding of animals. Animals like these birds, what you see here, these parakeets, we put out food in our home garden for animals to come and eat. And when they feed on this, their populations begin to increase and they become a problem to the farmers who are living around the area, creating a conflict. So what we should try to do is not just feed them with our food, but we must prepare our home gardens in a manner that is friendly to these birds. We should put plants that attract butterflies, birds, and so on, so that they can live a natural life, not feed on our food, but they can naturally grow in urban areas. So to answer your question, there are many issues with urbanization. The major issue is loss of habitat, fragmentation, which leads to pollution, which leads to death. So again, all these things can be mitigated fairly well, if we when we plan our cities, if we leave enough green spaces for wildlife, also when we plan our roads, if we leave the ways for them to cross, like even putting a conduit uh, tube under the road is good enough for animals to cross without having to come onto the road surface and so on. When we design high-rise buildings, to make sure that the windows and the glasses are visible to birds so that they don't fly into this. So there are a number of things that we can do or we can take into consideration when we are doing urban planning.
Thank you, sir. Those are some great points, I think. Much to learn there. So, as you said, the the younger generation has no way of seeing jackals or anyone or any animal actually in within city limits, and even if they do, they are considered a menace right now. Um, so, with that being said, I would like to move on to our next question, Dinat.
Thank you, Himat. Sir, as you said before, we have seen animal habitats that are being destroyed by urbanization, and this has led to conflicts between humans and animals. And as of now, the human elephant conflict has been a major problem, and this has caused damage to a lot of human lives as well as properties. This question is directed to you, Professor Mahanama. Tell us your opinion on this. Do you think the human animal conflict is because of a flaw in urban development, or are there any other reasons that could influence this matter?
Thank you very much, Professor Devaka. Actually, as mentioned, all the conflict in urban areas. I think I admitted all the uh, reasons and the issues basically in terms of wildlife in and around urban areas. There can be certain, this is not a common for Sri Lanka, it is many places all over the world. And some of the countries has taken serious, various action to mitigate that type of and minimize the impact on wildlife. But as you mentioned about, I will look at it in a broader perspective. When you look at this, we cannot put only in Sri Lankan context, as you mentioned, the elephant-human conflict and many wildlife conflict because of it's not. It's because of I look at it in a broader perspective. When you look at our spatial structure of the country, when you look at the Sri Lankan landscape, uh, it is actually redesigned or developed by the British colonial. It's a colonial kind of landscape. You got, as you know, we have major cities, Colombo, and you take the Kandy and all the major cities. They are actually planned and developed by the British for their simply purpose to take our resource to their country, and that makes the whole change of our landscape actually. Then you can see that certain extent we disturb the landscape of the country, and that makes now we cannot actually we were trying hard to revert back. It is not possible. So that what we have to uh, plan within that structure. So that's a major issue actually we are facing. How do you plan national landscape, national spatial structure? That is most important to avoid this most the problem. If you take example now, because soon after getting the independence, all of the government decided to start colonization schemes. We're sending developed most dry zone areas where the original settlements were there. So we send in people and creating the one biggest lands, development is the Mahavali development. I think that original Mahavali development program was last for 30 years. And that plan actually had a kind of arrangement where at that time there were nobody talked about environment actually. It's just a recent phenomena. People talk about recent environment as sustainable development, environment, everything coming at the later stage. The plans which were developed in 1960s, 70s, before 80s, there were no environment concern of the plan. So they only development, because as you know, sometimes we had a food shortage before agriculture, green revolution, and then come back to then various stages. Now we talk about the environment. Now it's a more serious issue. So when you developing a human settlement rather than focus on the urban human settlement, so anyway, there would be conflict with the natural environment, because our practice basically we create a settlement by removing the forest area, because that is the free available areas, and we develop that type of development. That makes we are encroaching the habitat of animals. So normally a normal way of doing planning, actually, we all know is physical plan. This major issue is the physical planning. So when you do planning, normally we actually study it's a kind of a rearranging the space. Now we get in anyway we got a space, that means landscape by the nature, or it's given by the one generation. So we try to rearrange this. Rearrangement that we want to accommodate all these problems are there, and we have to accommodate. We need housing, production, agriculture, employment. There are a lot of needs. So all those needs actually accommodate on land. So when you accommodate in those land onto a space, then you have to rearrange. When you are rearranging, you have to understand there is another need by the nature, animal needs, various things. So if you are not considering all those factors and you are rearrange without considering those factors, then there will definitely conflict. So that's what happened. To take away elephants, what the animals need, basically they need food, water, and they need their habitat. There are like the animals, they need certain other things. Like if you take example, the mating, their generation, a lot of things. So you have to study that, and their habitats are very important. As Professor Devaka mentioned, if you encroach the habitat of animals, then the conflict is severe. I think that's we have done in our planning in most of the cases. We were trying accommodating our needs by encroaching the habitat of the animals. What happened to elephants and habitat, we destroy them. And when you talk about habitat, they need the places there to, it's a kind of environment they prefer to live, and they do everything within that area. If it is not lost, then they actually go in here and there, they don't see. So they encroach, and even they damage the properties, they damage agriculture. They think the agriculture, their food actually. They don't see that the farmers have grown. There's no sympathy. So, and that's one aspect. At the same time, the human also understand the living with animals. That's also lost, because as you know, I can remember the childhood period. So there was certain time, people not, mobility was restricted. They don't travel. So I can remember so we normally don't travel after 5 o'clock. We are not crossing this Habarana area. So we know that elephants are hanging around. That is the time is actually elephants coming after 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock to the road, because they actually freely, we are not crossing, we are not intercepting. Now people are going, intercepting, and they're encroaching, then they made accidents. It's a very simple thing. We had a kind of living in harmony with animals and other environment. That was our practice in the past. That's lost, I think, in the way of the human, because that is, I think, people think it is not a serious issue. The technology available, they don't care about that. They just travel. Then finally, they got accident and intercepting and get some kind of hardship. These are all kind of issues actually. Therefore, when you are planning, you must understand the first thing, the natural environment that creates certain habitat. You have to understand, study the habitat and plan accordingly, and keep the reservation for those things and plan. There are many ways you can create, good environment, interactive, integrating environment. Can do, but only unfortunate what happened, decisions are taken by piecemeal way. If you want to have a housing project, they look at the project, not the other things. The housing projects cannot, we have seen that many places, they remove forest and have housing. Then later on, you need water, you need electricity, all come later, following. So a lot of example in the country that you can listen and you can see the TV, people are saying, all are actually isolated projects. They are not in a planned development. There's no planned development. There were planned development during British period. Colombo city, is a developed planned city. Kandy city, planned city. Nuwara is planned city. Many major cities are planned by British, keeping the provisions for environment. And you can see if you go to Colombo, near your school area, it's developed by Patrick Abercrombie, that's 1921. So you can see the planned green areas and keeping the white road and the reservation and all that kept, as a green city, but now it's lost. So that's the planned kind of development based on the British principles, not the local principles, right? Because British people did every plan according to their environment. You go to Britain and you can see similar, you go to any port city in Asia, you can find the same characteristics because that is British. When the British come here, they do plan accordingly. So now it's different. I think we need to have a new generation. You understand, physical planning is very important. So where you arrange your space to accommodate your need in honest space, similar to small scale, in your garden, your settlement area, your housing area, you plan various things nicely, arranging, maintain the functionality, and you accommodate your need. Similarly, you have to plan the city and the country accordingly. So you can't have everything everywhere. It must be, there are certain things you have to keep it as it is, or have to preserve them, or have to protect them to maintain the habitat. Not in individual. You have to look at the habitat point of view. I think that's my understanding, and I want to give my say too. Yeah, this conflict because of the urban development, you talk about is a broader per se, human settlement, conflict with the environment is happening because of not understanding the basic, the provision not given basic requirement of the environment. I think that's conflict because of that.
Thank you, sir. Those were some very important facts, and you talked about the importance of considering all the factors, and especially in this area. And we hope that we will somehow be able to resolve this issue moving forward. We would like to move on with the next question now. Hima?
Thank you, Dinath. Now, currently, we see a lot of issues in regards to upholding biodiversity here in Sri Lanka. Recently, we got to know that more than 35 forests are being removed in the country due to construction purposes. Professor Balasurya, can you tell us why this is happening and why mainly trees and forests are targeted when it comes to construction?
Yeah, very complicated question, Himad. First, I must compliment you all for getting this forum with like-minded individuals. And you are the youth of our country. You are the future of Sri Lanka. So I think it's very timely that you actually get insight from Professor Devaka, Professor Mahanama, and so many others. So I hope that you will continue to do so because I think you are our future. Okay. So it's a very, very complicated question that you asked me, simply because being in academia for many decades, I do not really know the proper answer to that question, simply because I do not know whether what the media is showcasing is true, right? So I'm not very sure. The media has a huge role to play. Sometimes it's very, very conflicting. So without actually seeing the forest being depleted, perhaps Professor Devaka is in a better position to answer that question. However, I will take this opportunity to talk to the youth on many other aspects which I am confident to talk about. So forest is not my area at all, but landscaping is. And the concept of landscaping has to be quite different to what you think it is. Now, most of you have a garden, and perhaps your parents and siblings get involved in it, and then they have pretty flowers, and they remove the weeds, and they remove the wild plants thinking they are Calais, but the Calais is important, right? If you want to have a lot of biodiversity, what is biodiversity? Lots of plants and animals, then we need a diverse landscape. Okay, so I think the very concept of landscaping has to change. Now, as Professor Mahanama rightly pointed out, the cities were designed by the British, and they brought with them the British concept of landscaping. They brought with them plants that did not belong to Sri Lanka. They introduced a lots and lots of exotic plants, which has their own problems. Now, as the youth of a country, you must always try, as Professor Devaka would also encourage, our native species because they are tolerant to drought, they encourage biodiversity, they become hosts for different animals. So some of the plants that you're not perhaps familiar with or don't think that suit a garden should be included. Now we know during the COVID pandemic for the last 1 year, we have learned many, many lessons, and I think the youth also has. We've been isolated, we've been staying at home, we've been watching nature, and I think Professor Devaka would have been very happy because the nature all over the world had an opportunity to get back into their habitat. We saw lions in different parks, and even in your garden, you would have noticed more birds and more butterflies because there was less traffic, less pollution. In Venice, the lakes came back to normal, and you could see the fish that were in the water, and Venetians themselves had their city to them because normally it's inundated with tourists, right? So COVID has taught the youth and taught all of us many, many lessons, and there's much to think about it and use those lessons for the future. So, what I would like to tell you is that as the youth, you have to remember that the Calais, the vergers that are on the sides of the roads, are important, right? Because as you know, bees are important. Bees pollinate our food. We get food security. And if we do not provide this wilderness, we won't have bees, right? Now, Sri Lanka, fortunately, has a lot of biodiversity compared to Europe and UK and some of the other countries. Now they have realized what has happened. Now, before it's too late, it's the youth who have to stop this devastation of the depletion of biodiversity. So in UK and Europe, they have started a program called rewilding. That is, they're allowing the wilderness to blossom. They are bringing in species that have got lost, right? So we have our elephant, we have our bear, we have our buffaloes, we have lots of birds, and the monkeys that Professor Devak was talking about. We've got them. So it's up to the youth. Now, you know that Greta Thunberg, the 15-year-old girl, has brought us, made us aware globally of the climate change, right? Now, she was only 15, now she's 18. Now, I think that's amazing for a young teenager to change the way we look. So the youth has a lot to play in this climate change, in bringing upholding the biodiversity, and that is keeping the biodiversity, in also addressing issues of the human elephant conflict, like Professor Mahanam was talking of infrastructure and so forth. So actually, you have a huge role to play. And I'm so glad that you are actually addressing these issues as well. So to go back to the question of forests, well, I must talk about Jeffrey Bawa, who actually had to design the Kandalama Hotel. At that point, when he was designing the Kandalama Hotel, there were many protests in the 1970s, long before you all were born. There were many protests, and the media had it all over the newspapers. Environmentalists, the community, they were all protesting about architect Jeffrey Bawa designing Kandalama in front of the Kandalama Reservoir. Even I was quite ashamed that they were doing something like that because I wasn't knowledgeable. Okay. However, the project architect, Milroy Pereira, who's the architect of Clear Point, I think we saw it in Professor Devaka's slides of the lake in Kotte. He said, you are in Colombo. You got electricity. You got pipe-borne water. You got roads for your children to go to school. You've got a doctor across. And you're staying with all the comforts. And you're talking about a community who has no water, whose children can't be taken to hospitals because there's no roads. The youth have no job opportunities, right? And it is very unfair. So what architect Jeffrey Baba and project architect Mirza Perez did was they designed Kandalama so that it did not harm the reservoir, but it enhanced the community. The youth was employed in the hotel, that is the Hilton Kandalama, and also in other hotels. So they were able to go from one hotel to the other. They had employment. The children were able to go to a doctor when it was necessary. They had roads to go to school. So there is two sides of this picture. True, we love our forest. We are very passionate and we want our wildlife. But we also, as Professor Mahanam was telling, think about the society as well, the community. It's very easy for us to be in a comfortable area and talk about these things and get passionate and get upset and get worried and so forth, right? But at grassroots level, we have to, that's why I said I am not qualified to comment on that particular issue because we do not know what the society is going through. We do not know whether they have food to eat, whether the youth have got jobs, and whether the children can go to school without being attacked by perhaps an elephant or other wild animals, right? So without knowing the picture, I cannot talk about it. So I think Ifribab actually showcased many years ago how you can design, how you can develop in a sustainable manner. Long before environmental sustainability was thought about, he was able to design the hotel and also make sure that the wastewater did not pollute the reservoir, that he recycled all the glass and plastic and so forth. We have a whole section in the basement for recycling and also provided the youth and the community with a source of income. The communities were also asked to provide food and like fruits and vegetables that the hotel could use. So that became a sustainable development. So it's easy for us to talk about the forest without actually understanding the problems that the communities have, that also has to be addressed. So I don't know whether Professor Mahanava, Professor Devaka can answer that question, but I'm not in a position to answer that question. Okay. So anyway, is there a particular time that we have to use, or this I can give more examples? Is there a time limit? Do I have to stop, or can I continue?
No, ma'am. Take all the time you want. No.
Then I must talk about Sam Popham's Arboretum in Dambulla. Okay, because I think it's important when we get an opportunity to showcase all this to the youth of the country. There was this barren land full of shrubs. What he decided was to make a dry zone forest of that particular area. Okay, so he started planting mango trees, and he found that mango trees were not growing well. But he noticed that the other endemic species that were planted by bats and animals and birds were growing better. Okay, so what he decided was he started clearing the undergrowth and he allowed the native species to grow, and it's called the Sam Popham method. And he was able to give back to Sri Lanka a dry zone forest. So that's one example of what this Navy officer did in 1965. Okay. Now, Rukragagando managed the Arboretum for about 15 years, and he managed to protect it for the youth of the country so that it's still there as a dry zone forest, right? That was made from a barren land. Okay, that's one example. And another example is Havelock City. Some of you must have gone there, where the car park, the concrete car park, has been converted into a park or into like a forest. And in a minimalistic way, I was involved with a designer called Lucky Senanayaka, who is also an environmentalist and a great designer, landscape architect, and whatever you want to call him, where the whole car park has been converted into a garden or into a forest. Again, you see that when you talk of gardens or landscaping, it doesn't mean just lawn and pretty hedges and pretty flowers. It is more of a functional landscape. Now, even your home gardens, you realize during COVID-19, even the Karapincha and the Rampe was not available, right? So I think as the youth of, the future of Sri Lanka, you have to encourage an edible landscape. That is a landscape that provides food for the family, right? So I think that's another way of looking at it, because what can you do to enhance the landscape? What can you do to enhance the environment? And another example that I would like to show before I stop is, I think Sunila Javardhana was also to come today, but she hasn't. But she's a wonderful architect who actually recycles and reuses materials, and she's done in Colombo Courtyard. And that's another lecture for another forum. And she brilliantly used um, cycle paths and also used tractor seats. Hospital beds were recycled, right? So again, you can see, because all this recycling also is connected to the environment, the biodiversity, the forest. We are all a system, So when we actually address those issues, some of the other issues also gets mitigated. Okay. So as usual, the ladies always talk longer than the gents. Okay. So good luck to all of you, and thank you for having me with a like-minded audience. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Wow, so many lessons and information for all the youngsters out there who are the next generation of our country.